I believe you each received a page, a two-sided page with fairly small print in your order of service. If you opened the document you received by email, you wouldn't call this small print because that had microscopic print. This is a statement that fundamentally came out in January. It was a statement made by the Unitarian Universalist Association condemning violence against Gaza, urging an immediate and total ceasefire. And there are a couple little editorial glitches at the beginning and one or two things it says are out of date. But following form, it's the statement that our association made about Gaza, and I will read it. We are not, just to preface this, and I will talk about this a little more, groups of people within our congregation decided that the congregation should make a statement on Gaza. We are not necessarily voting whether to accept or reject this statement as such, but I am using it as a model. We might want something much simpler. We might want something much different. We might decide that we want nothing, but this is just a starting point for us to consider. And I will read this because most of the points of discussion are mentioned somewhere within this document. And it does a little bit of couching it within the religious tradition. And that's one of the questions we're always asking ourselves is, what is our motivation to act? What comes from our faith background? And what is just our opinion? There are crystallizing moments in the course of history when, in spite of the differences that exist among us, our common reverence for life demands that we speak with moral courage and clarity on the side of love. As people of faith and conviction, Unitarian Universalists share a belief that every human life is sacred, endowed with worth and dignity from the moment of birth, with no person more deserving of freedom and flourishing than any other. Our living tradition has long maintained that the only hells that exist are those that we create for one another here on earth. We are watching in real time as the people of Gaza exist in a human-made hell that grows more unimaginable every day. At this point, over 36,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed and over 70,000 injured by Israeli attacks in Gaza since Hamas attacked Israeli citizens on October 7th. The medical infrastructure in Gaza has been decimated, and the Israeli government continues to prevent humanitarian aid, including food and water, from reaching refugees. And this week, which was in January, I assume, the Netanyahu administration announced the forced evacuation and ground invasion of Rafah, where 1.3 million displaced Palestinians have set up a massive tent city as a last refuge. The UUA first joined the call for a ceasefire on October 17th, rooted in our historic position as an organization. Nearly 4 months later, the situation could not be more urgent. In their January 26 emergency interim ruling, the International Court of Justice found that these atrocities in Gaza plausibly constitute genocidal acts and issued an immediate order to the Israeli government to take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2. That's Article 2 of the United Nations, not of the UUA. The United States Convention on Genocide. While the UUA has historically affirmed the importance of the genocide conventions, we know that there's a wide range of opinion among Unitarian Universalists about how this terminology is used today. What should be clear to all of us, however, is that the Israeli government's forced displacement, punishment, and intentional inflicting of suffering and death upon children and civilians in Gaza is a moral catastrophe that our faith demands we condemn and resist. In that spirit, the Unitarian Universalist Association reiterates our condemnation of the Israeli military's ongoing violence against Gaza and joins again with the growing chorus of voices across the globe urging immediate and total ceasefire, the provision of massive emergency humanitarian aid, and the safe return of all hostages and prisoners. As longtime proponents of the crucial work of the United Nations and its official agencies, the EUA is grateful for the nuance and thoroughness of the UN International Court of Justice's January 26 findings. We decry the Israeli leadership's ongoing rejection of all ceasefire proposals and outright flouting of the ICJ's findings and directives in its ongoing military assault. The EUA further condemns the U.S. government's unabated complicity in the crisis in Gaza, from providing massive military aid to Israel to slashing funding to the United States Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian refugees. Without international pressure, the Netanyahu administration will undoubtedly follow through on their vow to achieve total victory by decimating the entirety of Gaza. We call for the U.S. government to stop funding Israel's military machine and to leverage its unrivaled influence upon Israel and in the world community to intervene and stop the attacks on Gaza. Each day the assault on Gaza continues, brings us closer to the brink of calamitous international war. Tensions continue to escalate among nations, and violence has already transgressed national borders and international waters. As a faith community that has historically advocated for peaceful resolution of conflict and protection of international law, we believe it is imperative that the global community respond decisively to mitigate ongoing harm and prevent further catastrophic loss of life. This terrifying moment calls all people of faith and conscience to do everything in our power to push our governments to interrupt genocide, address humanitarian crisis, avert multinational war, and weave just and lasting peace across the globe. In that spirit, we offer our prayers to all those working to mitigate harm and stop the atrocities, from journalists and doctors and humanitarian workers on the ground to Israeli citizens and Jews across the diaspora, faithfully engaging and courageously protesting the right-wing Netanyahu regime, to global multi-faith and secular movements advocating for ceasefire. We urge Unitarian Universalists to listen deeply, especially to the voices of Palestinians, whose lives and communities have been the vast majority of casualties of this war, and to think critically about the ways the United States is complicit in enabling this disaster to continue. I'm getting near done, guys. Like many, we dream of an enduring peace in the Middle East. Israelis and Palestinians deserve real and lasting safety, as do all people in the Holy Land. Long-term diplomatic solutions that honor international human rights and religious freedom are essential. However, in this critical moment, we must pressure our leaders to turn back from this precipice of unspeakable violence, or this dream will not have a future. We call upon all Unitarian Universalists to open our hearts and to be present to the depths of human suffering in this moment, not just by one group, but by people of many nationalities, identities, and religions. We commit to identifying and mitigating the evils of anti-Semitism, anti-Arabism, and Islamophobia in our own tradition, and to address their toxic legacies wherever we find them. Our faith rejects all forms of nationalism and supremacy and insist that we struggle for multiracial, multi-religious democracy in our nation and across the world. We encourage all Unitarian Universalists to take action in solidarity, not only with global movements for ceasefire, but with liberatory pro-democratic movements of all kinds that are working toward a future that contains conditions of possibility for a true and enduring peace. That was a mouthful. And it was all on one page. You know, and I am supposed to talk now, right? Yeah. And I will summarize what was said there briefly. But as I said, we are beginning to address the current state in Gaza. And it's really a deep issue. And in many ways, it's a religious issue. In many ways, it's a political and power issue. In many ways, it's an ethnic issue. In some ways, it all goes back to Genesis 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who curses you I will curse. And by you all of the families of the earth shall bless themselves." This is the beginning of the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament to Christians. This is the beginning of the covenant between God and the Jewish people and the founding of the state of Israel. And the belief among Jews is that God granted Israel to them. And the belief among Jews and Christians, or at least the more orthodox members of both groups, is that God will bless those who bless Israel and curse those who curse Israel. And this is not the whole root of the story, but it's part of the depth of it.
Can you clarify what
Yes.
Yes, it's Orthodox evangelical, not Orthodox and other.
Oh, okay, not Eastern Orthodox, right. When I said Orthodox Jews, I was going to get to that. I mean, one of the questions that people ask is, why is there such strong support for Israel among the evangelical Christian community in this country, which right now is guiding much of our national leadership? Evangelical Christians make up about 14% of the American population, a much greater percentage of the Republican Party, and a much greater percentage of our House of Representatives. And for a long time, there was a narrative that the Jews resettling Israel was a necessary element to the second coming of Christ. It was the first domino that had to fall before we get to end times. And the, what do you call it, where we all disappear and go away if we're, the rapture, thank you. I knew that word would be in this room. That's sort of changed now. And now the Christian support, it doesn't ignore that, but it much more relies on this statement that those who are sympathetic to Israel will receive the support of God, and those who are not will not. And to the point that there are actually many more Zionists among the Christian population of the world, and many more of them in the southern hemisphere than in the northern hemisphere. This ideology is carried through a lot of African and other Christian settlements where there's a strong belief that what's good for Israel is good for me, because God says so. But that's not the real problem. The real problem is rooted in the settlement, the foundation of the Israeli state, their response to the Palestinians living there. And of course, as soon as Israel declared itself a state, a number of Arabic, Palestinian, and other groups declared war on Israel. There was a war at the forming of the state. And when Israel won that war, things were not good for the Palestinians that remained. There was a lot of displacement, a lot of taking over of personal property and removal of people. Israel has since set up a national entity that can be called many things, but it's much like an apartheid state now in the different classes of citizenship between Jews and Palestinians living in the state. The history of these other places, Gaza, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights, were not originally part of the Israeli state. They became part of the Israeli state after the 7 Days War in 1967, I believe, when Israel had been attacked again by a number of Arab nations. There was a very brief war, and under the auspices of controlling its borders and maintaining security, Israel took over these three places, and they were declared Palestinian communities initially. And there's lots going on. There's so much going on within the Israeli government, within Israel-Palestinian things. One of the solutions we ask for is a two-state solution. We hear a lot about that. Or why doesn't Israel just give these lands to the Palestinians and let them govern there and let everything else shake out in the future? I'm making this as simple as I can. And the real reason that hasn't happened is because the people speaking for the Palestinians have not agreed to one crucial term that Israel insists on, which is they will not acknowledge that Israel deserves to exist as a Jewish state. And without that fundamental acknowledgement, no Israeli government has been willing to do anything to work close to settlement. We've gotten close to two-state solutions at several times in history. And right now we're very far away from that. And so we're dealing with settler colonialism, with Israeli settlements in the West Bank in particular, and things going on. And it's quite an ugly situation. And it's going to be hard to figure out how to handle. And as much as there have been tensions, and there have been military assaults on Israel from Palestinian groups, there's been very harsh reprisal and oppressive actions by Israel towards the Palestinian groups. All of this culminated and really came to a head on October 7th when Hamas sponsored a raid into southern Israel settlements and killed well over 1,000 people and took 250 or so hostages. And Israel has responded to that constantly for the last, now we're 9 months or so. There has been military involvement in Gaza. Israel's stated claim is to root out Hamas and remove it as a force for its own security. And yet, Hamas is many things. It's a political party, it's a radical leadership, it's a military organization, and it has a lot of support among the Palestinian people. So we don't know what to do. But what we do know is that what's going on there is horrible, and something has to defuse it. And there's no way anything can defuse it without stopping the aggression, the military aggression, the bombings, and things that happen, like Israel is very tuned in to rescuing hostages. And this, you could understand that motivation. These are people of theirs that were taken from them, and they want to restore them and bring them back. They just did a rescue operation that saved 4 hostages, that brought them out. at the cost of at least the lives of 300 Gazans. And what is the calculus here? Where is right? What is the value of a life? These are hard questions, and these are things you need to discuss, and you need to figure out, and I'm going to quit talking, because I want you all to do talking. As I read through this UU document, it basically had 9 paragraphs, and one said, and I'm not even going to go through them, but the real questions we have to answer are, first of all, is this something where we, Beverly Unitarian Church, wants to weigh in and make a public statement of conscience? Obviously, we have zero political power, really, but people do respond to what we say. Like on our sign, we, the church, has had phone calls, even just last week or so, in response to things that show up on our electric sign out there. I had a call from a woman who was offended that we said human choice, or we said reproductive rights are a human right. And she said she disagreed. Reproductive rights and abortion is a sin, not a right. And that she was offended that we would put this up in her community. I think we're doing our good work there. And I tried to respond to her, and we didn't connect yet. But I would basically just tell her, thank you for your complaint, and we're not going to change. We have reasons why we say what we say, and we're sort of fixed in that position. We had the day after the October 7th attacks, I had a call from a policeman who said, do you still want that Black Lives Matter sign up there? Because there had been an episode where the local chapter of the Black Lives Matter in Chicago had put up a Facebook posting that included a Palestinian paraglider and in ostensible support of what had happened in that incursion by Hamas. And that was rapidly taken down, but historically there's very strong support between the African American liberation groups in this country and the Palestinians, whether or not they approve of what Hamas did. And he was offended that we would say Black Lives Matter when some of the Black Lives Matter people support the Palestinian cause. Again, the dialogue does happen, and the thoughts are influenced a little, and we can probably make that be more so if we choose to speak. And so I would like us to break into groups. And that means we got to move, and we got to move a couple chairs, and try not to end up with all of your own cronies. If you got somebody you want to sit with, if you and your spouse want to be together, which I never recommend, feel free to do so, or do whatever. But make groups of, say, 5, 6, 7 at most. Move chairs. We don't need them in this order anymore. And take a moment to get settled in and find groups. And really just discuss these issues. And I think the real questions are, do we want to call for a ceasefire in Gaza? Do we want to have Israel remove all troops from Gaza? Do we want to ask for the safe return of all prisoners and hostages? Both directions. Do we want to support fully humanitarian relief efforts into Gaza? Do we want to create pressure? Do we want to bring pressure to try to create a two-state solution? Do we want to ask the United States to either limit or halt military support of Israel? And this is one of the ways that we are involved in this as the American people, because we do. I mean, they report now in the news daily when a given bomb or missile hits a certain thing, and they claim we took out 2 Hamas leaders and there were 12 civilians killed also. They tell us whether that was American ordnance or not. And we should care. Anyway, I want you to talk about it, not me. Time. It's 5 after 3, Pam.
It's 11:42.
You all must have gone on way too long. Okay, well, obviously, if people have to leave, leave. These discussions, we'll have you go for 15 minutes and we'll have a brief callback, just to see what people are thinking. There will be something drafted and brought forward at the congregational meeting in 2 weeks if people decide that they want something drafted and brought forward. So we need to hear a little bit of response to know how to go about doing that. Okay, go. Stand up if you can. If you can't stand up, stay seated and people will come find you. Pull chairs around. Yeah, Jane, you stay put. We'll turn these chairs around. Oh, excuse me, Ruth.
I'm going to throw my perspective as the daughter of a Vietnam veteran and a little knowledge I have of the Korean War. Why is there drawn in the sand? All right, I can't find the sleep.
Okay, there's a group. Here's a group.
Why did it be done this time?
Okay, let's move Mary over and get Vicky in. You gotta scoot over a little. That's just the cicadas.
No, somebody's yelling over there. Keep their voice down.
It's gonna be hard.